Je m'appelle Ryan Ellis, and I'm here to sell you some café. This isn't the kind of stuff that's so crappy that the leading lady needs to pour it down the drain. It's très bien every time, oui oui, and it is Sparkplug coffee. We're talking about Europeans in this podcast today, but Sparkplug is a North American thing. They've got the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in Canada. They offer up many blends and roasts, not to mention decaf or half-calf. Anyone in the Great White North will get their orders delivered for free within a week. Americans can get in on this too, and they'll also be brewing at home in a week or less, but they're going to have to pony up some euros for shipping. Okay, not euros, but you know what I'm saying. Keeping with the theme here. If you make the choice to be a member, you will get all kinds of perks and deals, plus you will save money on every order. You can customize your membership to get stuff when it suits you, not just when Sparkplug wants to send it to you. That's a big reason this is not a typical Coffee of the Month club. You Java drinkers are just going to have to trust me that going to sparkplug.coffee/HYES is the best choice you will make today, unless you decided to kill your gentleman caller. Because maybe that was the best choice you made today. Who am I to judge? Well, in this podcast, I will be doing a lot of judging. Anyway, use our HYES promo code and you will save 20% off your next order. Okay, we're about to talk about a very long movie, so let's just get to it. Bev.
And action. Have you ever seen
Jeanne Dielman, 23, Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. That's the last time I'm going to say that entire title in this movie. Some French, some English.
Just 1080, you can... What is it?
I don't know. I didn't bother looking
I
that up.
know. It's 1080.
My first question is, does any of that matter in this movie, that we have that specific of where she lives?
Why is the title her name and address?
Apparently her name is only ever in that letter as well. We never actually hear her say her name, and we wouldn't know it except for this is the title of the movie. Okay, bonjour mes amis, and merci beaucoup for spending some of your day with the 531st edition of Have You Ever Seen Jeanne Dielman, etc. We go back into the far-off past and take a look at classic motion pictures, and we spoil them from the start to the fin. I said it in the sponsor promo, but I'm Ryan Ellis, and here's my wife, the woman who suffers. So if somebody made a movie about her, it would be sure to rank on the Sight and Sound's Top 100 list. Bev.
That's me.
We'll get back to that woman suffers thing in a few minutes. But first, the coming attractions opinion question for Jeanne Dielman, etc., etc., etc. So many people talk about how this movie is a vanguard of feminist filmmaking. But what is the most feminist film you have ever seen?
So this is impossible to answer for a million reasons. So I'm just going to name what I consider to be my favorite feminist film, and that is Fargo. And I think what makes it a great feminist film is that it just simply presents Marge, a female hero, unlike any we've ever seen before, who's smart and competent and respected and gets the bad guy, and it's all presented without comment, just giving the world this wonderful character without acting like they're doing us girls a favor or constantly pointing out all the hardships she had to experience. No, it's not even about that. She's just there giving the world an example of a normal-looking pregnant woman who's amazing, who we all fall in love with by the end of the film. And honorable mention for the same reasons I say Alien.
Or Aliens? Even more so maybe, or just Alien?
I prefer Alien because Aliens does the cliche thing for a female hero to give her a mother arc.
Become a man also. Or manish.
I guess. Mostly it's that her whole motive is to protect a child. Women heroes so often have to be motivated by either protecting children or some kind of trauma, usually rape.
It's on the list, at least. Let's put it that way. It's just
okay, it's on the list. But I would say Alien is a more feminist film for those reasons.
Well, I will tell people now that Bev and I don't compare notes, but first I'll build up to my answer. Thelma and Louise comes to mind.
Oh, Ridley Scott as well. That would be like my favorite overtly feminist film.
Okay. 9 to 5. Little Women. Of course, I'm very partial to the Winona Ryder version in 94, although I liked Greta Gerwig and Saoirse Ronan's version a couple years ago. Even Barbie should be considered as one of the better feminist films of recent times. Very funny, very satirical. I've heard some takes on that lately, and by the time we post this, I'm sure there'll be a lot more.
Oh, yeah.
Monster hit, just as of, I think, yesterday, as we record this, reached $1 billion worldwide. But I'm going to say, a Fargo. With
Get
Margie,
out, really?
I picked this too. Margie is the very pregnant police chief who seems like a soft touch, but is actually excellent at her job and braver than any man in that movie, and she doesn't even have to basically turn into a man to win the day, as many other great feminist characters do, like Ellen Ripley. As great as that character is in Alien and Aliens and the other Alien movies, she has to become a bit of a man, and you pointed out also a mother. Margie is going to be a mother, but that's not really the point.
No, it's irrelevant. It's kind of like a cute thing about her character that she's very pregnant, but it has nothing to do with her doing her job and her just doing kick-ass police work.
And if somebody said Jeanne Dielman, okay, didn't make my short list, but I can see why someone maybe thought it would. For theirs, at least. Okay, so Jeanne Dielman was screened at practically every festival there was back in the mid-'70s, which is certainly fewer than there are now. Now you can do that, and I don't know, you can play at 912 film festivals. Then it was released in France on January 21st, 1976. But Bev, the movie is, 47 years old. I'm usually bad at the math on those, but I think I got that right. Please give us the skinny. Tell us what Jeanne Dielman is all about.
Jeanne Dielman is a lonely widow living in Brussels with her son Sylvain. Jeanne gets up every day and makes her son breakfast and coffee. She does the shopping. She cleans and organizes. She prepares dinner. And she works as a prostitute to make money. Then she bathes, eats dinner with her son, takes him for a walk, then prepares for bed in order to wake up the next day and do it all over again. Like clockwork. Except her precise, meticulous routine is disturbed. By what? Unexpected free time? A failure to find a particular button? A bad experience with a client? Hard to tell. But cracks appear in Jeanne's routine, a routine that perhaps was the last bastion between Jeanne and madness, because Jeanne's troubles come to a head when she suddenly murders one of her clients.
Or, in a nutshell, and we saw this movie not long ago, weren't planning to podcast about it, we changed our plans, it was going to be Old Boy. But part of the reason why we decided to do it is because of some of the things that we were talking through, for one thing. And I said this during that screening, well, not screening, but just watching it for ourselves. Groundhog Day. Maybe not that long when we watched it.
Or longer.
She does pretty much the same thing every day, and we get to see every last second of it. This movie is famous for one thing more than anything else, and that is that it's 3 hours and 20 minutes, and we see process big time.
I also heard it called Chores, the movie.
Yeah, fair point. Another good nutshell. Okay, let's get into the bona fides in this movie. There's one main reason to cover it. So first of all, the Rotten Tomatoes critics, 95% of them like the film, 8.6 out of 10. There are 56 reviews on the site. I bet a lot of those are fairly new because of what we're about to talk about. And 80% of audiences, 8-0. The main reason we decided to watch this film at all, or to cover it now, it was number 1 on the Sight and Sound's critics poll just last December, and was number 4 in last year's directors poll. The directors and critics thing is fairly new, being separated, by the way. Most of the time it's just one poll, I believe. I think that's right. Within the last couple of cycles of this thing. It's every 10 years on the twos. It was 35th in 2012, 73rd in 2002, and 127th in 1992, so it steadily climbed. Bicycle Thieves, we've covered that, was the first ever movie to make number 1 on the Sight and Sound list, 1952. Then it was Citizen Kane 5 times in a row, 62 to 2002. Vertigo, 2012. One of the reasons we decided to do a podcast is because that came out. We got talking about classic movies more than we even had before, which was plenty already. We've been together for not quite 2 years, I guess. And we said, let's do a podcast about Vertigo. No one's ever heard it. I don't think we even have it anymore. And that led into the AFI movies we wanted to talk about, because I said I'd seen every one of the major ones. I'd seen everything that came out on those lists, other than one, Porgy and Bess, the romance list or the passions list. I've seen every other movie on those various lists, and certainly the main ones. But Sight and Sound I wasn't so up on. But it's because that came out, we said, let's talk about classic films, but doing the AFI. Chantal Akerman, the director of this movie, also did News from Home, unbearable. And it was tied for 52nd in last year's poll. I don't know why. That was unwatchable, and it was 2 hours shorter than this was. Right? You agree?
Oh, I couldn't even get through it. Don't you remember?
That's right. I finished it without you.
I bailed.
Mom is bitching at her daughter again. It's the same thing over and over. This is a repetitive movie, but we'll get into why that does work, at least in some ways, if not a lot of ways. Dan Merle, who's a podcaster and a YouTube guy I've learned a lot from, he talked about this list a while ago. I think it was back in December when it came out. And he said that the Sight and Sound wants their voters to keep social justice and social awareness in mind. So somebody's top 10 is not necessarily the top 10 movies that person thinks are the actual best. Okay, that's important to know. But here's something I've been brewing in my head for 9 months.
I'm worried.
Since December. You shouldn't be worried.
Okay.
I'm going to steal from Frances McDormand, Fargo. All right, I didn't think about that fact, Fargo. When she won her second Oscar for 3 Billboards a few years ago. She started by saying, "I've got something to say." And the speech got very political, and I agree with, I think, everything she said. The funny thing is, her speech ended with the phrase, "inclusion rider," which I'd never heard of before, which is all about making sure that film companies are inclusive and not discriminatory, which I'm certainly for. We need even more of that. We just don't only need that. But here's what I've been stewing about since the Sight and Sound list was released last December. I'll admit that I was cheesed off when this list came out. It wasn't just that Jeanne Dielman was number 1, although that did get way under my skin. I thought, you guys think this is the best movie ever? I think my bigger problem, though, was that I yet again felt left behind by the world, and that stung. I think I know movies pretty damn well, and yet I hadn't even heard of this film, or News from Home, her other movie, or 8 or 10 others that made the list that year, because I looked at more than I ever had before, really studied it. And I thought, am I that out of touch with what constitutes the greatest of even classic films? Never mind what a 20-year-old is into these days? And yes, it does annoy me that if a woman suffered, then that movie has an excellent chance of making the Sight and Sound list. There have always been plenty of classic films in their list that fit this "a woman suffers" stereotype. Persona, Vertigo. Those are unquestionably great, and they're movies that people have definitely heard of. But tell me the average person who's even heard at all of Black Girl, Wanda, or Jeanne Dielman.
I had never heard of Jeanne Dielman.
And I didn't even include just now selections from prior Sight and Sound lists that didn't make the cut last year. So while that "a woman suffered, let's vote for it" thing feels like pandering to me, it also contributes to truly great films like Chinatown, The Gold Rush, and Lawrence of Arabia not making it in 2022. All 3 of those made previous lists, including the previous 2 cycles, in 2002 and 2012. And in even earlier years, The Gold Rush was on the very short list, but now it's just gone altogether? On that note, as much as I like them both, do we have the context yet to put Moonlight and Get Out on there? Or even newer films than those, like Parasite and Portrait of a Lady on Fire? I'm not disputing the quality of any of them. I'm a big fan of 3 of those, and I respected Portrait of a Lady on Fire. But how can you say a movie is one of the 10 greatest you've ever seen when I have a jar of olives in the cupboard that's been around longer? But because I was quite outraged by so many of the selections, I decided to put my money where my big mouth was and watch everything in their top 100 that I had never seen before. That was 32 on December 1st, and now I'm down to 5, most of which can barely be called movies. Showa, Satan Tango, Satango, I don't know, Satan Tango, one word together, and Histoire du Cinéma are 3 of those 5. Showa is 9.5 hours long. Satan Tango, however you pronounce that, is close to 7.5 hours long. While Godard's Histoire du Cinéma, and God does a Sight and Sound list love Godard, is 4.5 hours long, but worse, it's listed on the IMDb as a TV miniseries. Why are things that are either literally, a television series, or something we need an entire shift at work to get through included in this? And to counteract that, they've got things like Meshes of the Afternoon, and La Jetée, which are both short films. They're good, but they're not movies. They're short films. I respect the Sight and Sound and have followed it closely these past 2 cycles in 2012 and in 2022, and I'm sure to refer to these lists plenty in the future, including in next week's show. But holy God, there is something even more flawed with what they decide is the best than what the Oscars vote for. Like what you like, and your top 10 is your top 10. I'm not trying to say that people are wrong, but I can't believe that so many of these motion pictures made enough people's top 10 that such dubious selections then made Sight and Sound's list, because that's how it works. Enough people like this, it's in their top 10, you add all those tallies up, and it makes the list. One last thing. I find it ironic beyond belief that in an era when people have such short attention spans, a 3-hour and 20-minute movie where barely anything happens gets to be top dog on a prestigious list like this. That concludes my rant. Thank you for your attention.
All right, so if I may respond.
Please.
Because what you didn't mention is that when the list came out, and you were pretty cheesed off, as you say, about it, you and I had a proper fight about this. Because I disagree with you on some pretty major points. I agree that a lot of the movies are about women suffering, but truthfully, a lot of the movies are about suffering, period. I think if you were going to go down the list and count how many of these movies are about men suffering, it would easily outnumber the number of movies about women suffering. And let me just state for the record, women are 50% of the population. So until we have parity, I don't want to really hear it. Now, sometimes I like to indulge in the fantasy of what the world of film and film criticism, because it's critics that vote on this poll, what it would look like if we actually had parity right from the jump, and if women and people of color had actually had a seat at the table through history. How would film look different? How would our opinion of what makes a great film be different? It's impossible, of course, to remove ourselves from the context of over a century of an art form overwhelmingly dominated by one gender and one culture, but it's nice to imagine a world where the presence of a film directed by a woman topping a list of best films ever made is greeted with curiosity and not rancor. And I'm not saying that you reacted with rancor, although you were pretty angry about it.
That day, and then I was curious, and I tried to see as many movies as I could.
That's true, and then you responded with curiosity. I like to think that me pushing back
was probably part of that.
And giving you gears about it is part of the reason for that. Because you are a curious person, and you do love movies. And I think you kind of admitted on the day that part of why you were upset about it had more to do with this.
I felt left out.
You felt left out, yeah. But
I can't even have this anymore.
So much about movies, and here is this list with all these movies. I'll admit, I had never heard of Jeanne Dielman when that list came out, along with many of the films on that list, and I consider myself pretty knowledgeable about movies and having like a pretty eclectic and even, I would have said before that, sophisticated taste in movies. Although, you know, there's just always going to be people who literally do this for a living or have PhDs in these things. They've made it their entire lives. This is our hobby. And for those people who are the ones voting on this, it is a more, I don't say sophisticated. It's not the IMDb list. Right?
Oh, I'll give you that.
This is not populist.
I'm glad about that.
Me too. I'm glad that this list exists, and I know it enrages people, but you guys have every other list. Look at the AFI list. It's full of very popular films over the years that are great films. But these are great films too. They just serve a different taste.
I saw 27 of them, and I don't think that more than even 5 of them I would call great.
So you and I were just talking about this yesterday. We were quoting Fran Lebowitz. You can't tell somebody that their preference is wrong. So these people were asked to vote on their 10 favorite films. They were asked to do what I just described, to imagine a world where one very small sliver of the population did not have massive dominion over this art form for the past 100 years. They said, you know, open your mind. And to a lot of these people, they're going to vote for Moonlight. They're going to vote for Get Out. They're going to vote for Portrait of a Lady on Fire because of recency bias and because they probably have not seen that many films directed by black people, directed by women. Those movies, in my opinion, are better than a lot of movies on this list.
Yeah.
But again, that's my preference. That's my opinion. I may have put Moonlight on my top 10 list. I love that movie so much. I think it's so beautiful, and I think it's important. If I was asked to vote for a movie directed by a black person about the black experience, that would definitely be pretty forefront on my mind.
Do the Right Thing, which is on the list, by the way.
Okay, I prefer Moonlight. That's my preference. Yeah. So as far as I know, and maybe you can correct me, the Sight and Sound voting is not ranked, right?
I think the way it works is you send your top 10 in. A lot of people are on this. I think it must be hundreds. It's got to be, right? You total that up. It's like voting for a president.
But each film you put on your list of top 10 is counted as one vote, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So it's perfectly possible that not one single voter called this their all-time favorite movie.
And how could they if they didn't actually rank them? Just included them as a 10.
And I also saw it suggested that in a weird way, Jeanne Dielman, along with movies like... Dielman. Along with movies like Portrait of a Lady on Fire, Moonlight, also benefits from some recency bias just because it was hard to see for a great many years.
That's very true.
Criterion recently released it. I'm not sure exactly how recent, but in the last 10, 20 years, Criterion made a version of it. And so people who couldn't see it before could see it for the first time. It's climbing the ranks of the list. If you're interested in these things, that is going to get your attention, and you're going to see it the same reason.
I'm glad you said it. I mentioned that already, that it definitely was going up the list. And
yeah.
If I'd been following this in 2012, 2002, the way I did this time, I would have seen this movie if I could have found it back then, either of those times.
Right.
And it wouldn't have been such a surprise to me. It would have been like, okay, it's already been going up the list, and number one, okay, fine. I think my shock was, what in the living God is this movie? I've never heard of it before. Number one? But then I look into it, you spend some time researching, you see, okay, but it's gone up and up and up and up.
And I think there's lots of people who are probably going to watch just about anything that gets a Criterion release. It probably looks more palatable to people now than it did back then because Chantal Akerman, along with other people who make what they call slow cinema or transcendental style films, It's become a more popular style, which makes it more palatable. This movie is easier for me to watch because I've seen movies like Cold War or The Green Knight that owe a debt to Jeanne Dielman.
I just love this Dielman thing.
Am I saying it wrong?
Well, this movie's not well enough known for somebody to say it's right or wrong.
Oh, yeah.
I've always heard...
I heard people say Jeanne. They call her Jeanne. But I see
which
Jeanne.
I might have thought would be the case, too. But I never heard of the movie till last December.
Our high school French education, my high school French teacher
Jeanne is probably more like...
me right now,
Jeanne,
I'm sure.
Anyway.
And anyone who's upset about this film making the top of the list simply because of its style... Why weren't you mad about 2001: Space Odyssey? And people could be equally angry that Tokyo Story has topped the list before, and another film that is just very much that
good
transcendental
movie,
style.
but not the greatest movie of all time, I don't think. But then, as we said, people aren't actually voting it in that way.
It's never going to be perfect. But to say that this is the definitive answer on what the best movie ever made is, it's art. You can't rank it.
Well, that's true.
You can ask people what the best ones are, and you have to see it as a tool of... Here's a list of movies that you should see, that these very smart people would recommend that you see if you care about cinema. Same as, like, huge film fans would recommend that you see these top 250 movies on IMDb if you like popular films. Is Shawshank Redemption the best movie ever made because it's topped the
I love it, but
IMDb
or number 2
list?
at least all the time. With Godfather, they battle it out all the time.
All of it is just a reflection of how people feel about it today because the Sight and Sound list has changed so much over the years. Jeanne Dielman, as you said, is 47 years old, and it's only topping the list now. Well, it's not a different movie. So obviously this is a reflection of taste at the time. Maybe taste that was created by Akerman and her influence on other filmmakers. So I think part of the appeal of this film to voters has just got to be that Chantal Akerman had the guts to see this vision through. There is no way she knew it was going to work. This is only her second film. She was 25 years old. And there's no way she didn't experience pushback from people every step of the way who must have thought she was crazy. Because on paper, this film is crazy. Akerman is so brave for just making this how she wanted to. And what she made was something that was brand new and radical and helped refine the language of film and showed future directors a powerful tool that they could use to get through to audiences. But I think just her bravery might have been what kept her in people's minds when they were making that list of top 10.
Why do people revere this movie this much? And is it because Akerman made her movie? And you're saying that's the answer.
It almost surprises me that it tops the critics list instead of the directors list. Because I could see directors not just seeing this as an inspiration. It's a very powerful film. It surprised both of us at how effective it was.
We talked a lot through it, which is great about being able to see it at home. We didn't expect to like it very much because when I said to you, all right, well, we've got time on this Monday. We were on vacation. Let's spend the 3.5 hours. We'll eat during it because when you look down at your plate for maybe 15, 20 seconds, you're not going to miss anything some of the time in this movie after what we'd heard about it. And that's true. You see an awful lot of process in this movie, which, to be honest with you, I did appreciate. Is there too much of it? Oh, yeah. But there's a part of me that was also weirdly compelled when we went into the kitchen to make dinner. I think I barbecued that night. And I'm outside getting the barbecue ready. All kinds of processes you don't think about.
It was in your head.
What if somebody was watching me do this? Would they want to see any of this? Would they be interested? You see her making food. You see her making coffee. You see her go to the post office. You see her walking around. You see her do all kinds of things in this house, which are mundane, boring tasks. And I would not say I was transfixed, but I was also not really all that bored. Now, if we were in the theater, would have been a different experience because we were able to talk through it. We made fun of it a little bit. I did the Groundhog Day because the scenes take forever. This movie does not need to be 3 hours and 20 minutes long.
But we didn't talk as much as you would think we would.
No, and we did it less as we went along.
Like this. When we watch silent films, we're guilty of talking a lot. We watched Safety Last recently, and we chattered over a lot of it, but there was a point where you and I were watching this movie. First of all, we totally planned, because we fully anticipated we were going to hate it, and it was going to be a chore. We had no intention of doing a podcast about it.
I did not want to go into it thinking that way. I'll admit that I thought I might. But
do a podcast about it?
No.
Oh, hate it.
Didn't want to think that way. I never want to think about that way about any movie. I've watched some more terrible movies than anybody listening has ever watched, especially in the horror genre. Alex Trebek. But if you go into it thinking you're going to hate it, then what is the point? So I know we both thought that's what we probably would come out of it saying, but I wanted to think, okay, well, then why do people think this movie's so great? So no, I didn't go into it thinking that way. I go into it thinking that I probably would be bitching about it more than I actually am. I know I've said a lot here, but it's more the
You're complaining about the list. You're not complaining about the movie. Because we planned to watch it over the course of 3 days because we were like, this movie is
Or at least
too
two.
long. Let's see how hard this is to watch, and we can spread it out because this is a lot. This is a woman doing chores for 3.5 hours. It actually is that. There's virtually no dialogue. Mm-hmm. The dialogue that's in it, some of it is very important, very insightful.
Yeah, but very little.
But there's so little dialogue, and it is repetitive, and it is long. And we watched it in one sitting. I was never bored. It kind of puts you in this trance, and there's this tension that builds up through the film.
Maybe partly because you're thinking, why? Why are we watching her do tasks that take this long? If I saw this movie without knowing anything else about it, the reputation, the sight and sound stuff, I don't walk out of movies. I don't think I would have walked out of this movie if I was in the theater. We don't try talking movies in theaters. We whisper here and there. In our living room, we did plenty. But it'd be a matter of saying, why am I seeing this? There's got to be a point. And the funny thing is that there is a point in a very big way that this is a Groundhog Day thing. She does the same basic things 3 days in a row. She has John's over 3 days in a row. The first time goes fine. The second time, we don't know what happened, but didn't go fine. And the third day, she kills the guy. Mr. Cocktail ends up dead. The guy looks like Mr. Cotter. Same time frame as that show, by the way. That was on around the same time as this movie came out. Gabe Kaplan playing Mr. Cotter. The process ended up being fascinating to me in some ways. Whatever that food she's making, that ground beef looking stuff, it's not ground beef, but whatever it was she was making and kneading the dough and over and over and over again.
Oh, it's a meatloaf. Yeah, she goes
Oh, it's
on.
a meatloaf?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But she needs the meat for a suspiciously long time, honestly.
4 hours ago, I was making ground beef so I can make, well, not making ground beef, I was preparing it for hamburgers. Doesn't take that long to prepare because it never does for me. If somebody was watching me, they wouldn't be interested, but I was doing the same thing she was doing. And the fact is that you're right. After a while, I wasn't even thinking about turning away because I wanted to know where this is going. This has to be going somewhere. So maybe in some ways, this is becoming a mystery film, especially when you see her be agitated after that second day. So this is going somewhere. I did not think it was going to go where it did. And that's another big reason I got to give this movie an awful lot of props because I don't know if I love that ending. We've seen that in other movies since, but this is almost 50 years old. But that did surprise me. Because I knew something big had to happen because it says in the description online that something traumatizes her and changes her life forever. But then to go to the level of murdering the guy and we have no idea why. Now here are many questions I have for you. Why does she stab Mr. Carter? Does he look like her husband? Did she orgasm? Was it bad if she did? Meaning it scared her maybe? She never had before? Just how long was murder brewing in Jeanne? Did she kill her husband and now she's at it again?
Maybe. Do they say how her husband died?
She talks about it with her son. The longest speech or monologue or dialogue scene in the whole movie.
Strange conversation she has with her son.
Is her talking about it with her son. Yeah, her son barely speaks. I said to you after he'd been on screen for a while. First of all, we thought this could be her husband. He looks
He's
so young.
such a weird-looking kid.
Yeah.
He looks like he could be 35 or 15. I cannot tell.
But then I asked you, had he spoken? Because he'd been on screen for quite a while when she makes him dinner, brings in the soup, brings in the main course. And then he hadn't, I don't think, spoken once. I don't think he even said hello. Maybe, but I don't think he even did that. But then, yes, he does speak. And, of course, he has probably the second most dialogue in the whole film. But you look at IMDb, it's just Delphine Seyrig, so she's Jeanne. Jan de Court is Sylvain. And then the three callers, first, second, and third caller. Henri Stork. Jacques.
The Johns.
Yeah, Jacques Doniol, Valcroze, and Yves Bacall. And then Chantal Akerman, Chantal Ann Akerman, according to the directing credits, is the neighbor. We never see her, but we hear the voice. That's it. Those 5, I guess 6 credits, that's all we got in IMDb. And yet, the funny thing is, I told you that was all it was, because I looked at one point, we had so much downtime during the movie when there's all these long scenes going on. But then so many other people do speak. The butcher and the post office guy and other people do have dialogue.
Yeah, she's
scenes.
going around town trying to find that button, or she's in the post office.
But on IMDb, it's just 6 people, basically, including the director herself. So anyway, what do you think about that? Why does she go to that level to kill this guy? Is it because he looked like her husband? Did she have an orgasm? Was that bad if she did? Has she done this before? Answer any or all of those questions.
I don't know. I don't
What do you think?
I think that this woman is tremendously, painfully, excruciatingly lonely. Every single thing she does is for somebody else, in the service of her son, service of the neighbor, and service of her clients, the Johns.
Right.
Every so often you see the briefest moment of her having a coffee, staring into space. And that's the only time she gets for herself.
Or sitting in the chair. That's the shot in the IMDb. There's a trailer, I think. that I'm seeing lately, that probably changes, but as today is being recorded on August 8th, it's the shot of her sitting in the chair, staring straight ahead. And ironically, where he sleeps, he's not sleeping there, he's at school. And of course, they put that hide-a-bed thing back in place all the time. But when she's sitting down in that shot I'm talking about, she would be facing him if he was in bed. Well, she couldn't fit there, but if she could actually fit there, she'd be looking directly at him if he was in bed.
Nobody really knows what happens to throw her off her game. Mm-hmm. And it's implied that...
Respect, by the way. Big respect. Like it.
Oh, that it's a mystery.
Yes.
That you don't know. Okay. So one of the suggestions is that it's because she finds herself with an hour of free time. And she is so accustomed to her clockwork precise schedule.
She's
her
a robot.
This clinical precision that she does everything with.
I'm sorry,
and she
Dave.
Is perfect.
I'm afraid I can't do that.
She is kind of a robot. It's not even just that she does all these tasks and she does them perfectly. It's that she does them with this robotic efficiency. There's no move wasted.
The first day especially, yeah.
It's very soulless, right?
Yeah.
This is how we know something is wrong, is because she starts to look a little more human as she's doing her tasks. She makes mistakes. She forgets to rinse a plate. She forgets to turn a light out when she leaves a room. And she has to go back and turn it out. And you can see there's this level of distress on her face.
Danger, danger, Will Robinson.
I read that in one of the screenings when it aired at Cannes, and it was a hit at Cannes, she drops the fork, and we're talking like 2 hours into the film, that the audience audibly gasped.
Okay.
Because she dropped a fork. Because that's the power of this style of filmmaking, how much it draws you into her bizarre habits. And yeah, one of the suggestions is that because she finds herself with an hour of free time and she does not know what to do with an hour of free time.
She breaks.
She sits in that chair and she just has time to think and reflect, and that is
2001, The Ape. She becomes self-aware.
Yes. Okay, sure. We see an obelisk. And then I thought, watching the film, that something happened with the second John. That's when she burns the potatoes. It implies that they spent more time than they should have in there. She comes out, her hair is messed up. She never fixes her hair, even though we see her meticulously fix herself up after the first John. And her son is like, what's wrong with you? What happened to your hair? And from that moment, she's really never the same. So it's possible that something happened in that bedroom. We don't know. She's so opaque. We really cannot see inside of her. And I think this is part of what draws us in. We talked about this when we covered Nomadland. Nomadland is another movie that on paper should be unwatchable. Oh, yeah, that's right.
3 times she's come up today.
And another female director, and another movie where virtually nothing happens, and yet it's not even just that it's entertaining, it's transfixing. It is mesmerizing.
I liked it more the second time.
Yes.
I liked the first time a lot.
Even though nothing happens. And we rewatched it. We couldn't wait to rewatch it. And it's such a beautiful
I'll see it again.
film. There's no plot to it. So why is it interesting? And I said part of what the director has to do in order to draw the audience in to a film that's made this way is you have to leave a lot of mystery and you have to force the audience to figure it out for themselves. Because if you spoon feed them anything, they're going to get bored. Paul Schrader has a lot to say about this style of cinema. He's the one who coined the phrase, the transcendental style.
Yeah, okay.
And he put it so nicely. He said, most films lean towards you with their hands around your throat, trying to grab every second of your attention.
But he's the Bresson Ozu lover, so
yes.
Not
and
like
he
that.
says these films, they lean away from you, and they use time as a technique. When you do it properly, as this film does, as Nomadland does, you activate the viewer. You force them to take part. You withhold information. You force the viewer to pay very close attention to context cues. Then, once you have that audience's attention like that, you have the opportunity to just blow them away with one creative choice. The choice in Jeanne Dielman is to deviate from Jeanne's routine, to show her making these small mistakes that feel massive, and then when she finally acts, and what does she do? She kills this man. Now,
wasn't pre-planned. The scissors were there because she got the package from her sister. She opened it in her bedroom and left them on her dresser. There's no plan to use them in an aggressive, murderous way. But then when she was sitting there tidying herself up after that guy has his orgasm, we don't see it. I'm glad we don't. I mentioned the scene where the camera faces her directly. Many times it does, but in that one where she's sitting in the living room facing the couch, she's not giving anything away with her face.
No.
She doesn't in that scene where she kills the guy either. It's not like it's some sort of, oh, my facial tics are giving away. I'm now broken. I gotta kill this guy.
There is performance there, but it's incredibly subtle.
Oh, yes.
Because then the next thing she does is go back to the dining room. there's that beautiful light effect.
Yes.
That,
Which
for
we
most
saw
of the
through
film,
earlier in the movie.
Yeah, it looks like there's a sign across the street that flashes in their apartment.
And we said, how does Sylvain sleep through that when he's in the living room all the time?
And we say, well, you must be used to it.
He gets used to it.
This is not a nice apartment. It's a one-bedroom apartment. He has to sleep in the living room. These people are not wealthy. She has to turn tricks in order to make ends meet. Her husband died. They are making do. When you see...
Do you think Sylvain knows, by the way?
They're poor?
That she's doing tricks. Trying tricks.
No. Sylvain doesn't think she exists. Well, of course he thinks she exists.
He's the food machine.
She is a robot.
Here comes my dinner.
He is a bizarre character, and he gives her nothing. She says several times in the movie, oh, I wanted a child. Oh, I don't know what I would do without him. Now, he is getting older. You look at this kid, and you're like, he's not going to live with you for much longer. What are you going to do? And maybe this is part of what's on her mind. This is a woman whose life is about to get blown up because this kid's either going to go away to college or get a job and move out. People do not live at home forever. There's no reason for him to keep sleeping in his mother's living room for the rest of his life. He's going to want independence. He's going to leave. And then what will she be? This is a woman who, as I said before, literally does nothing for herself. There's a shell. She wouldn't know what to do. So that could be part of what's making her start to go mad.
I'm looking, by the way, at the second John. And I don't recall in the movie itself, but as I click on their IMDb profiles, Jeanne, probably Jeanne Decourt, plays Sylvain. And then Jacques Doniol Valcroze plays the second caller. They don't look unalike.
He looks like the son.
Well, let me click on it for you to see. No one else is going to see this. People at home can look at this up if they want to while they listen. But that's the second John. Obviously not a young man.
Move it onto the other screen. I can't see it. Oh my God, yeah. Oh, yeah, he really does. He looks like an older version of
And I just thought of this when you were
Sylvain.
talking just now. I never even thought of looking that up until now. So maybe that's supposed to be a bit of a hint. If we see their faces, the three Johns leaving, I don't recall seeing the second guy. So I'm basing this on what we see online just now.
Yeah, we're not meant to linger on them. They are meant to be these faceless Johns. And the sex, when we do see it, is miserable. It's hard to imagine.
But is she having an orgasm now?
Okay, so yes, she had an orgasm. You and I
Was it miserable then?
I wasn't sure. Okay, prior to her having an orgasm, miserable for her. Would you pay a woman to stare at the ceiling and not move while she's half dressed?
No.
Right, for a prostitute, you think that she would put on more of a show, but it just seems to be this bland, and they're masturbating with her,
The covers
right?
don't even get pulled back.
She
It's
doesn't
always
even take her clothes off. She's
a little
still wearing
towel
a
on the
slip.
bed. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and this is a movie where we see her nude earlier, so it's not like there's some kind of modesty at play here. No, we're not trying to get around nudity.
We do see her have a sponge bath type thing in the tub very meticulously, but yeah, you see her boobs entirely.
And not very sexy either. There's kind of a reflection of her relationship with Sylvain, because they kiss hello and this and that, but there's no real affection between them. They don't seem to enjoy each other's company. He's as much as a robot as she is, and as I said, he's probably going to move away from home soon. And he lives in this home that she pays for with prostitution, that she cleans meticulously every day. He wears the shoes that she's polishing. He eats the meals that she prepares. He never, ever says thank you. He's kind of like a little jerk.
He keeps reading when she tells him not to at the table.
He has no regard for her. The movie must want you to dislike Sylvain. You look at this boy, this young man, and you think, is he worth it?
I don't
This
hate
is
him.
what you've given your whole life
He's
for?
a teenager. I can't hate a teenager.
Okay, fine, but in
for
the
not
context
being
of this
conscious of his
movie,
mother's feelings.
If he was sweet, if he loved her, if he thanked her, then you would feel like there's a value to her work. And this movie is literally 3.5 hours of a woman's work. The labor of women is invisible.
And Jean's based on the director's mother.
Totally. Which is the only reason that this woman could have made this film at 25 years old, is because she watched her mom be like this and do all of this. Everyone around her not notice her. Although she has said in interviews that she grew up surrounded by women, that her mother had sisters, her father had sisters, their whole family was a matriarchy.
We covered Before Midnight back in January, where the women are the ones preparing the meal.
Great example.
And the guys aren't doing anything other than eating the meal.
Who hasn't gone to a Thanksgiving dinner where a woman spends all day in the kitchen making this beautiful dinner, and guys watch football, they do whatever they want, they roll in when dinner's ready, they go, oh, that was wonderful. Or even worse, dad carves the turkey and everybody gives him all the credit. Yeah. And then they roll off and they drink brandy and smoke cigars or whatever they do, and all the women go back into the kitchen and do all the work. And it's invisible labor. We see clean houses and beautiful meals and immaculate hair and makeup and clothing in films all the time, but we never see the time and effort it takes to make that happen. And I also think that Women's labor is invisible in our culture. The effort that goes into feeding, clothing, cleaning up after a family, it's invisible to us. It was invisible to us when we were kids. I never no appreciation for everything that my mother did. I still very clearly remember living on my own for the first time and my bathroom getting dirty and me being like, someone's got to do something about this. As if I wasn't the only person living in the house making the bathroom dirty. I laugh at myself immediately like, oh yeah, it's me. I'm the one that fixes this.
And our mothers weren't even doing the thing like in Pleasantville with Joe and Alan, having to look completely perfect all the time.
Oh, my mother complained constantly. I don't know. Actually, your mom is not much of a complainer. And actually, you could probably relate to this in the sense that you are the Jeanne Dielman in our relationship.
That's true.
You do more of the domestic work in our relationship. You are far more meticulous about how things are done than I am. I like to think that I'm trying to meet your standard.
You're the Sylvain.
The Sylvain, you take that back.
You're the second John.
And I'm very grateful for everything you do in this house, but there's no way that there aren't things you do in this house that I fully take for granted and do not notice. And if you ever went away for a week, I would probably discover there's all kinds of things that you do that I take for granted.
The floor is so dirty now.
Yeah, oh my gosh. You were cleaning the floor pretty much every day. So here's a film that forces us to watch women's labor for 3 solid hours. Plus, this meticulous perfection, this attention to detail, it's repetitive, it's monotonous, and it's endless, just like domestic labor. And it's radical to show this now. It would be transgressive now, but in 1975, this truly would have been radical. This is the feminine mystique presented without comment.
Do you not think, though, that 3.5 hours are almost that? Even though it benefits from being slow. Groundhog Day. That 3:20, it could have been 2:20. It could have been 2 and made the same point.
Okay. I'm not going to sit here and deny that there is a version of this movie that's 2.5 hours long that is also very effective. But considering how powerful this movie did in the end feel to me, and how I have not stopped thinking about it, it lives in my mind. This is what I'll say for the slow cinema. It forces the viewer to lean in and take part, but it also forces introspection. While you're wondering what the point is of watching Jeanne polish her son's shoes for the second day in a row, you might start to think about the task of polishing shoes. And is that something her son should be doing himself? Is that something she needs to be doing every day? Why is she compelled to shine her son's shoes every day? When's the last time I shined shoes? Is it a force of habit? Is it because she's afraid that people may catch on, that she can't afford to buy her son new shoes when they get scuffed? Is it just merely habit and taking over her life? Is it a pointless activity that she does so that she's never forced to sit in the chair and sit with her own thoughts while we are sitting with our
because
own
when
thoughts,
she does,
interacting with the story,
worse.
interacting with Jeanne's world, because we're forced to sit in this moment with her. What you are thinking at minute 2 is not what you're thinking at minute 4 in that scene. So if you cut all those scenes from, let's say, 4 minutes, I mean, I don't know, I didn't time them, but let's say 4 minutes to 2 minutes, I think the film might actually play differently and feel differently.
Okay. Yeah, the last shot does go on for 5-6 minutes, maybe?
Yeah, but I had so many thoughts in my head.
It makes you wonder, too, when she's sitting there in the living room, facing the couch during the day, I believe before she's killed anybody, if she's thinking about that specifically at all. Has she done this before with a husband or anybody else?
I don't think she has.
Well, let's get into what happens next. Sylvain comes home, asks, "Where's my dinner?" Pleasantville again. Then realizes that he's going to have to help his mom clean up a serious mess in her bedroom. And I think Sylvain might be next on Jeanne's hit list if he doesn't stop reading at mealtime.
If he's got his nose in his book, I wonder how long it would take for him to notice that he doesn't have a plate of 5 or 6 potatoes in front of him.
That kid eats a lot of food, too.
But he doesn't eat it.
But still, he ate a lot of those potatoes,
He
though.
ate about the same portion as his mom ate, maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
She serves herself a portion that's less than half of what she feeds him.
Right.
And she's trying to get him to eat, but he's not interested.
He is skinny.
He is quite skinny, yeah.
But she wants to feed him all of Ireland.
So many potatoes.
All of Idaho.
I don't know how much you like potatoes, but
I love potatoes, but not really that many.
You have to be pretty hungry to just go to town on plain boiled potatoes.
Yeah. So Delphine Seyrig is Jeanne. She was in The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. I think one of the many people in that. The Day of the Jackal, which was before this. Also worked with Truffaut and René. Depending on the lighting or the angle, I think Seyrig either looks great or mediocre. And I find that fascinating. It's almost like that Seinfeld thing. Depending on the lighting, she's awesome or, oh. I don't mean to be criticizing her looks, but she does generally look like a pretty attractive lady, but not unbelievable Margot Robbie. Who wouldn't want to be in her bedroom with her, even if it was boring sex? Other times she looks dowdy and old. And maybe that's unintentional, maybe it is intentional. But then you point out, too, that the setups in this movie, the camera doesn't really move, and of course the camera stays still for so long, so often.
The camera is always at that Ozu angle, right? It's always at a child's point of view. It's like about waist length. And I think it's important. This is a movie she made as kind of about her own mother. The only time in our life that we would have been forced to sit and watch a woman do domestic work most of our life. This is all of our mothers, isn't it?
And there's no score on this. It's just classical music, particularly Beethoven. So maybe in Chantal Akerman's life, even before 76, obviously, back in whatever that would be, 50s, 60s, they had no music, really, or if they did, there's no television. Mm-hmm. These seem like pretty boring people. Maybe her family was too, and all her entertainment was to watch her mom do stuff.
Yeah, nothing else to look at.
Yeah. Jeanne Decourt, the son, or Jeanne, probably Jeanne, only made a handful of anything in just a few feature films. Henri Storck, so he's the first John, was more of a director and a cinematographer than an actor. His interaction with her at the end of their day, whatever that was, an hour, probably not even an hour, is so matter of fact. We can gather what happened in there if we don't know for sure until the movie plays out more and more, but we'll see next week or something like that. We've seen that kind of scene in other movies before, but it's done so well here, which is just so, okay, bye. You're not going to kiss your prostitute maybe, but it is so matter of fact.
Yeah, it's truly like he's at the shop.
I have more passion for people I've dealt with when I bought things than he does for her, and he was just inside of her. Jacques Donnel Vaucruz was the second John, did a lot of writing and directing too, and some acting. And then Yves Bacall barely did anything. He's the third John. Mr. Carter. And then, as I said, Akerman is the voice of the neighbor we see a few times. We did love, of course, when Jeanne brings the baby inside and barely pays any attention to that kid whatsoever. That's a 70s thing, I guess, because you'd think that she'd be doting on the kid, but no, not really.
Well, when she does dote on the kid won't stop crying.
Leave me alone!
Yeah. She's like an automaton trying to soothe this child. No real heart in it, and the kid is crying worse when she's trying to comfort him.
Why isn't this working? The writer and director was Chantal Akerman, did News from Home, and A Couch in New York in 1996 with William Hurt and Juliette Binoche, I think it was. It was 2 stars, so she did work with Hollywood players at some point. She committed suicide in 2015. She was only 65. I didn't read why. Maybe we don't need to know why she did.
Apparently she had a long history of depression. She was
born out by the films.
Yeah. But she was a prolific filmmaker. She worked a lot.
That's true.
And it's funny, I've been thinking about News from Home, a movie that came out the year after this. And News from Home is her in New York and her mother writing these letters. Won't you come home? Oh, what are you doing over there? No real mention of her career. All those letters presumably would have come after she had a huge success at Cannes with this film. And she said that after the response there, she was invited to all these festivals all over the world. By any measure, at 25 years old, she was incredibly successful, especially considering she's making this really niche, strange film. And her mom only wants to talk about, I sent you money. Did you get the money? Are you going to come home? I miss you.
But
like
she
her
made
mother
the point
isn't interested in this career, this
movie,
impressive career.
And it goes on and on and on. Way worse
I
than this
didn't
does.
like the movie. I'm just saying that I have this fresh perspective. If you were a Chantal Akerman fan at the time, it might have put at least a little more depth to that.
The producers, there were 6 of them, including a few women. Didn't write their names down. Well, let's see. Guy Cavagnac, Alain Dahan, Liliane de Kermadec, Corinne Yanat, Evelyn Paul, and Paul Vecchiali. Probably butchered some names there. Luckily, IMDb was just open right there. We saw the DVD from the Toronto Public Library. It's 166:1, so it fills your screen. Cinematographer Babette Mangoult also shot News from Home for Akerman and directed other films of her own. I did read that a lot of the crew was women.
Yeah, she wanted a crew of just women, but she said in another interview I saw with her, it was literally impossible because so many of these jobs in film women were completely shut out of. So you simply couldn't find a grip, somebody to do lighting who was a woman, because they never had the chance.
But her key people, though, cinematographer, and also the editor, Patricia Canino. This is her debut as a cutter. She only cut a few other films. And there was no composer. So at least the people she's working with, probably the closest. We always think at least the cinematographer and editor especially, both women. And you like the shot compositions you pointed out during the screening when we saw this.
The compositions are beautiful, and they're classical compositions. They're painterly compositions.
Very Ozu-like you said.
Very Ozu-like. His compositions are so meticulous and careful and beautiful. That makes it easier to stare at a frame for a long time.
Okay then, Chantal Akerman. Sorry, Jeanne Dielman, I mean to say. Let's see the title. I'll say it one more time then. So let's scroll up here. 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. Your last thoughts on it?
Before I get into my last thoughts, I do want to speak quickly about how this is considered a feminist film. Nobody can talk about this movie without calling it a feminist film. Every time I would read that or hear that, it makes me uncomfortable because when any piece of art is designated as feminist, it's a trap. What makes this a feminist film? Because it's a film about a uniquely female experience? Because that's only exceptional when the default is the male experience. And even the phrase, the male experience, it sounds silly because the male experience is what has stood in for the human experience to this point. Nobody would categorize a movie like Saving Private Ryan as a masculinist film, even though it's about an experience that is uniquely male. But as soon as a film has this feminist label, it feels like people have then permission to skip it or ignore it and dismiss it as something that's niche and unserious or something, God forbid, with an agenda. So even though this is, of course, almost explicitly a feminist film, the label troubles me.
Reductionist.
It's reductionist, yeah. And it's only feminist because women are marginalized in the first place. You could make this same movie about a man who works in a factory and does the same thing day in, day out. We're going to cover Remains of the Day at some point this year, right?
Yeah, probably.
I just read the book, beautiful book, about a man basically doing what she does, where his whole life has been reduced to service and nothing else, and he has no personality of his own outside of his job as a butler and making everything meticulous and perfect.
But Emma Thompson makes that movie work, and that's why it's good.
Oh, okay. I actually can't remember the movie.
He's great in the movie.
I'm just talking about the novel. And it's not considered a masculinist movie. You could make this movie about a man. Everyone would just consider it then a human story.
Okay, let me respond to this whole thing. So my problem with the Sight and Sound in general, and not even so much this movie because I liked it far more than I thought it would. I remain puzzled that it was number one, but I don't think those people who voted for it are lying to us either. They wanted it in their top 10. It got enough votes. We said that
So
already.
lots of other movies by women on the list. Right. The Piano could have made the top 10.
I'm the one that programs the schedule, generally speaking. And we did Sleepless in Seattle. I don't care about Sleepless in Seattle that much. I was never a huge fan of it. We didn't like it that much when we covered it a few months ago. But I thought, let's cover a woman-directed film. We haven't done one that often in a while. And then this came up, and we got another one now. We'll do maybe a few more this year. But we've done most of the really, truly best ones. But I'm somebody who saw so many of these movies, or had seen them before, of course, because I'd seen 68, I guess, of the top 100 as of December 1st last year. Now I've seen another 27. And I'm somebody who tried to watch these movies with an open mind and saw some Poirot, whatever, LeFou, one of the many Godard movies on that list. He's overrepresented, for God's sake, more than anybody else is. He's good, but good God.
French films in 75 general, way overrepresented on the list.
Not Truffaut, Godard films on the list.
Yeah,
French, you're right. French has way too much on there. But I saw things like Tropical Malady and Black Girl and Wanda and this and News from Home and over again and thought, okay. And some of the really old ones like it was an old one. Ivan the Terrible was on a previous list. I've tried to watch the movies that have made any of the Sight and Sound lists. But I've seen so many of the ones that made this most recent list, and very few have made me think, why didn't I see that 10, 20, 30 years ago? But that was often true about Oscar winners or AFI winners or movies that were just supposed to be great that people told me about. I finally watched and thought, where was this movie all my life? So I think this may be part of my problem is that I had a quest. I'm still on that quest. I will see Shoah one of these days and Satan Tango and Histoire du Cinema and Andrei Rublev and whatever the fifth one, what's it called? A Brighter Summer Day, I think it is. That's my remaining 5. But very few have impressed me that much.
So hear me out. You're talking about the movies that made the list this time that are movies that people voted for probably because they were encouraged to get outside their comfort zone.
Not white male people directing them, especially. Yes.
So consider that you might like movies made by white men because you're a white man.
Okay.
And that a black girl watching the film Black Girl is going to feel far more moved by that than she is by Vertigo, a movie that I find tremendously alienating and actually troubling. And while I can admit it is a beautifully crafted film, it repels me. When you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. You are accustomed to every film that people call a great film is called a great film by somebody who shares a lot of world experience with you personally. And less so with me. And even less so with a black woman who might see a movie like Daughters of the Dust and feel something
That was solid, by the way. It was okay.
Okay, I personally haven't seen it, and I should see it. And I'm always interested in seeing movies from different perspectives, but I've also been raised on movies from a male perspective, so I have a lot more practice at seeing movies that are not made for someone like me.
But I'm telling you, I've seen a lot of these movies very recently, in fact, and really my whole life, but especially recently. And I'm just thinking, this is what you think belongs on your personal top 10? I don't get it.
You don't relate to that experience.
But I'm trying to.
Okay, great. But you have to admit that your experience colors the way that you interact with these films, and part of your experience is being spoon-fed art that is made for people like you, your whole life. And not even just that, but being reassured and reminded constantly that this actually is the great art. Jane Austen, yes, she was a great writer. She's like a niche writer for girls, not one of the greats. Although I think people are amending their opinion of that now, but I always am going to default to talking about women creators because I am a white woman, so these are the people I relate to most. But you could do doubly so for races and cultures that are not white and Western.
I try to be open-minded. I know I'm not always open-minded.
You're more so than a lot of people. You can take the credit where it's due. That
a lot of my favorite artists, and this isn't one of those, a lot of my favorite best friends are black people. So many of my favorite artists, my whole life, have been women singers, and now more recently have been black women singers. I didn't know much of Nicki Minaj before, or some of these other really talented artists that I really like them. Every time I hear a new song, or not even necessarily black women, but sometimes white women, I like that song. I can
absolutely vouch for you here.
There you go.
That's 100% true.
Ask our friends,
you
too.
love female musicians, yeah.
And then you stumble across something like Lost in Translation by Sofia Coppola, which remains a great film by any measure, I think.
I'm surprised more people didn't put that on the list, considering they would have been encouraged, but I wonder if that's just been too on the top of everyone's list for too long. Part of it is
too easy to choose that?
Too easy to choose that, yeah, exactly.
I just think that some of the movies I've watched that made this list, and I've seen, of course, so many of them before, but the ones I watched recently, I thought, man, really? We do not see eye to eye, sight and sound. Voters. That's not the end of the world. I'm glad I have my horizons broadened. Finally saw this movie. I don't get why it's number one. It does have a slow, hypnotic quality that makes this a movie worth seeing. If I didn't say that, I should have said that from the start. It's worth seeing. Although you do have to be a film buff, I think. The average person just isn't going to like this. Yeah. But I do think it could have told just as good a story with a movie that's at least an hour shorter.
And I would also definitely hesitate to recommend this to anyone but a devout and curious fan of cinema. But I'm here telling you that I was not just profoundly moved by the film, I was rapt. I am so grateful that this film exists, and I'm grateful that it topped the Sight and Sound list, because I otherwise would never have watched it, which is a shame, because it is a real work of art.
It might feel like a cliche now that she goes to the level of murder, because a lot of movies do that in the end, I think, at this point. But in 1975-76, it wasn't so obvious that a character who had no inklings to murder goes to that level, and we don't know why.
I wonder how many men went home to their wives that night and watched them wash the dishes and methodically go through all the routine, and then wonder...
And then hid the scissors.
Is she thinking about killing me?
Hid the scissors and the knives.
Well, I know where my scissors are hidden, babe. Do you?
We have a lot of scissors that I bought. Big scissors buyer, Dollarama. Okay, that's it for Chantal Akerman's Jeanne Dielman, finally in the books. On Friday, I'll be posting a solo show. I didn't do one on August 11th, but I'll get back to what's been my normal Friday routine on August 25th by yapping about Richard Widmark in Sam Fuller's Pickup on South Street. One of my goals with these Friday shows is to talk about filmmakers who have never come up on this channel before, like Chantal Akerman. But here's two birds with one talk. And in 7 days, Bev and I will get all black and white on you, or stay all black and white, since Pickup on South Street was also shot that way. And we'll cover another movie that the Sight and Sound and many other esteemed groups of movie watchers think is all right, as we see what's what in The Night of the Hunter. The coming attractions trivia for The Night of the Hunter. Charles Laughton is best known as Captain Bligh in Mutiny on the Bounty, plus he's so witty and or devious in films like Spartacus and Witness for the Prosecution. Recommend that. Check it out. Billy Wilder film. But he wasn't just an actor. He directed the classic Night of the Hunter, starring Robert Mitchum. So my question is, what's the best film Charles Laughton ever directed?
So for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about Night of the Hunter. You obviously already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis Ellis and Ryan is at MovieFiend51. And you can also reach us by email. Have you ever seen podcast@gmail.com. And you can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
Au revoir.